Hello and welcome to the Rush Roundtable. This is episode 137, where we discuss the Manhattan Project, the third song off of Power Windows, a notable historical song for the Rush catalog. At this point, we're not really reading from the song by song book anymore. We're just going to jump right in. And for myself, looking at the lyrics, imagine a time when it all began in the dying days of a war, a weapon that would settle the score. Whoever found it first would be sure to do their worst. They always had before. My interpretations of this lyric, this verse, it certainly references the fact that they were still testing in the summer of 1945. Germany was already done. Japan was holding on, but some people have argued that Japan was almost ready to surrender. But they were still running, I think, the Trinity test in summer of 1945, dying days of a war. And Neil's use of a weapon that would settle the score certainly speaks to whatever animosity was still being carried from the Pearl Harbor bombing. Now, referencing that, I would sort of, for myself, even as a kid, not just with this lyric, but other aspects, I always would think of how, as a kid, it was kind of obvious that, okay, well, these people have issue and they did this. Now these people retaliate. Now they did this. Now they did this. They did this. Growing up with the troubles in Northern Ireland, the issues with Palestine, it was always people back and forth in the whole idea of settling a score. But as this song discusses, this was a pretty big statement on settling a score. Anyone else have any comments?
I do. I mean, one of the most important things we can realize is that when this song was released and written, we're in the midst of the Cold War. Mm-hmm. So all of the imagery that's in this song has a lot to do with the time period that we're in, which is nice because Rush often moves with the time. And when you have these gems of historical songs, they really get it right.
Certainly. Right. I guess if we're all settled with that, anyone else?
Just to note that those last couple lines, would be sure to do their worst. They always had before, just the thought of that. It's not just to do a little, but to do their worst. And that's what war always seems to do. Right?
Actually, in saying that, you kind of reminded me what I mentioned right before we got on, that with one of my neighbors years ago, having worked on the Manhattan Project, he was actually one of 70 scientists and workers who signed a petition that was meant to go to Truman to say, please don't use this on Japan. So dozens of the individuals working on the Manhattan Project basically said, this is horrible. This thing is brutal. Please don't use this. And one of the generals in the Army at the time ensured that Truman did not receive that petition.
Wow.
So yeah, he was ready to do the worst, because the petition began with I think it was I have my notes here. It was a Hungarian physicist who started the petition, and he's someone who had been in the country for a while. He'd worked with Einstein, and I have way too many notes to pull through. But Leo Szilard was the physicist. So he circulated it. It was meant to go. There's even a Life magazine article where the scientists reference that this is more than the world needs and can handle. So do their worst. Wow. Yes. Anyway, David.
Okay. Yeah. Second verse. I'll just read it. Imagine a man where it all began, a scientist pacing the floor in each nation, always eager to explore, to turn the winning trick, but this was something more. Now, one thought I had on this, that what you just said sort of corrects what I was thinking. Sometimes how science can be very disinterested with the ethical connections of what science is going to do. I remember I was at a conference, and a Swiss scientist working on some geoengineering projects was asked the question in the Q&A, what should we do maybe to avoid needing this, big thing they could shoot up in the sky to filter UV rays and whatnot. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, he didn't understand the question. He just thought, we can do this, so we're going to do it. And, well, what about consequences you don't foresee? Well, we can fix those too. This sort of techno science thing, working in. But anyway, so it was great to hear what you said about there was a petition of scientists not wanting to have the bomb dropped. So that was terrific. And then I don't want to jump ahead too much into a verse that isn't mine, but Neil, in a few ways here, really seems to speak condescendingly isn't the word, but to use the phrase, the best big stick. And I tied that with the line later, all of the brightest boys, so this idea of not a group of mature people making sound, rational decisions, but just we can do it, so we should, or, it's fun, so we will, without thinking of the consequences of what they're doing. So condescending isn't the word I'm looking for, but he is talking down to them a little bit by talking about big sticks and brightest boys on there was one of my takeaways from that. And then, of course, that last line, but this was something more. It wasn't just to turn the winning trick. And, here I think of the scale of techno science in war. It's not just a regional situation where, the people that get hurt are just, the people fighting in the region, but rather the scale of war now with a nuclear bomb and, with the capabilities that we have is far more widespread than, what war had been, before that time. And, that's sobering. So indeed, yes, this is something more than just turning the winning trick.
It's as I also mentioned before we came on, that looking up, I chose to look up Teddy Roosevelt's comments specifically because of the idea of everyone sort of misquotes Roosevelt's comments, which, once again, scrolling through my notes here, speak softly and carry a big stick, semicolon, you will go far, in regards to his foreign policy. But of course, at that time frame, the big stick was a strong navy, because there was still the maritime battles going into the 1900s when he was elected. So at this point, right, that was the idea of moving from maritime battles into World War I, into World War II, into this. That was a pretty substantial jump up.
Yeah. Remember, your pilots and airplanes are all part of the Navy during this time. It's before our formal Air Force. So it's definitely a great point to bring up that the big stick was the Navy, in fact. But the big stick is such an outward expression of, we're coming, and you can see the big stick. A lot of what was done here was in secret. So to reference what Neil is talking about in the secrecy of the desert sand has to do with, well, who are the scientists who were there? And David brought up the different scientists who were there. They were deliberately there. They weren't just chosen. It's a group of scientists who were refugees from fascists and fascist regimes. And a lot of them, while they were recruited for their utmost intelligence, I mean, they worked with Albert Einstein, and J. Robert Oppenheimer was one of the biggest components of the Manhattan Project. These guys had a little bit of a vengeance, behind their actions, because they didn't really start until 1941-ish, when, by the time they all convened in Los Alamos, it was 1941. I mean, this had been in the thoughts of the United States and in secret since 1937 or 1939, I believe. It wasn't until 1941 that they gathered. So it's important to note that the brightest boys in this case, that were playing with the biggest toys, were deliberately there to what they knew would eventually cause a level of harm and a level of destruction the world had never seen before.
I would imagine that in the beginning, they figure, well, we're developing a weapon that's going to really this is going to change the pace, but they probably reached a point where it's sort of, oh, this is big. We thought it was here, this is up here or up there, as opposed to,
Yeah, don't forget they tested it. They tested it in the desert, and then they tested it in Bikini Atoll. They knew exactly what they could do. The capability of this thing was.
Yeah. Ralph.
So I'm talking about the chorus, and the verses are kind of mellow. You got just the drums, keyboard, and vocal, and then I always felt the verses versus the chorus were more of the reaction to the story, where the verses are telling the story. This is the reaction, and it's more hyped up. It's more frantic. You got the Big Bang took and shook the world. Big Bang that created our universe, and then we've created a Big Bang that can destroy our planet. And then the shut down the rising sun, obviously a reference to Japan, the rising sun. So, and then just, big shots try to hold it back, fools try to wish it away. And the hopeful depend on a world without end, no matter what the hopeless may say. It's just the two different sides. We got the guys in charge thinking that they can control this, and people just not wanting even to believe that this is happening. And to what Michelle said, I was there in the 80s, in the Cold War, where we had movies like The Day After, and it was a real threat. You really felt it. It was
Dawn.
So
Everyone's
really
finger was hovering over that button.
Exactly, right. So many, right. That's what you think. It's just one bad day and somebody's pressing a button, and now the world's done, So it's going to be really scary.
Well, we did. I got to say, and I'm kind of shirking my job maybe in reading the lyrics, but the one line or combo of lines we have here too, the end was begun, it would hit everyone when the chain reaction was done. And that certainly speaks to what everyone's been saying so far. And also, very directly, you look at, no pun intended, but it's going to be the fallout of some of the testing, like with the Bikini Atoll there, they had all the ships around the island. And after the mushroom cloud had settled, after the water had been evaporated, some of the ships, well, all of the ships were radioactive. Some of them were actually, I guess, scrubbed, but some of them were just taken back near San Francisco and sunk. But at that point, it's sort of, well, where's that radiation going? Kind of like some of the other issues we had. We go back to the 80s with Chernobyl, or last decade with Fukushima. That sort of the chain reaction. It's sort of it is in some way or form going to hit everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mind the dogs that are my neighbors.
The pun intended, chain reaction, fallout. These are all really important lyrics and parts of the story that Neil brilliantly adds in there, obviously.
Well, I think there was some source that said Neil read like a pile of books, to make sure that he got his information correct, which you would expect. You read a pile of books anyway, but focusing more heavily since, yes, no internet, which in some ways might have been better for him to be able to look things up.
The number I heard was 10 books he read.
Okay.
And in the research I heard where he said scientists really thought this could be the end of the world. The tests could have just caused a chain reaction and just ended the world right there.
So the important thing too is that with some of these songs, we have to mention The Day After, because it's funny that movie is referenced. We referenced that obviously in Grace Under Pressure discussions. Right. Some of the 80s nostalgia has been out there, not just with Stranger Things, but you have shows like the Goldbergs, which had their Rush episode. And so at some point, somebody always references The Day After, because I can certainly remember when I saw it, and young enough where it's like, because, okay, here's a realistic rendition of nuclear war. Now we're even more scared.
Right.
Now, at this point, if we move out of the chorus, into the verse that Michelle will cover. Imagine a place where it all began. They gathered from across the land to work in the secrecy of the desert sand, all the brightest boys to play with the biggest toys, more than they bargained for, which we kind of already foreshadowed.
I already did foreshadow this a little bit, but just to get into the intricacies of it, I'm a social studies teacher, and I often use this song to teach the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the background of it. But there's some interesting little tidbits that come out of this too. Most of the scientists, as I said, who participated in the Manhattan Project were there because they wanted to be, not just because they were chosen. And those naysayers and the people who said we should not do this were put to the side. They weren't invited to Los Alamos. And the reason that they worked in the secrecy of the desert sand is because they themselves, some of these scientists, worked in conjunction with spies. And these spies were privy to information that Germany was arming basically a uranium production and uranium manufacturing system was starting to happen. So they got the heads up that there was a major scientific advancement, and they were mostly refugees. So they were afraid of being caught as well. You know, Axis power nations or even refugees from fascist nations. They completed the project in 28 months, which is like warp speed. And they were in a rush, pun intended, to get this done. And we often think that something like this must have taken years and ages of research, and it didn't. They did it so quickly that there's a happy accident that came out of this. And I teach this to my students. When we learn about the Manhattan Project and we watch movies associated with it in the day after and things like that, it's such a heavy topic. And I always like to bring up the fact that one of the byproducts of this experiment is the advent of mechanical refrigeration that's accessible to all. So we went from ice boxes to refrigerators and freezers in layman's homes. That was much more affordable because they did this in such a hurry and in such a rush. So at the end of studying this really heavy topic, I mean, you get to see pictures, of people and obviously deformities of animals and, the after effects of this. It was nice to have an ice cream party to celebrate the fact that you can now have ice cream in your home. And it just wasn't commercially grade Freon refrigeration. They were able to compress Freon into such a homeowner level and an affordable level that's one of the happy outcomes. But one of the things that's really notable about Los Alamos is that it still stands as this very important bastion of scientific research and experimentation and advancement with nuclear fission and experiments having to do with physics. I mean, it's still at the forefront, so it's still operational. We take this really bad event that happened and something that we're sorry about and something that could be potentially full of regret, as the song even suggests. And it was so much more. But we know the value that that desert location had and still holds today.
Actually, you reminded me of the war documentary that much like the Civil War, much like Vietnam, they ran the documentary on PBS, which I assume as a social studies teacher, you might have seen it or parts of it.
One of the Ken Burns documentaries, probably.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, at one point when I completed the bachelor's degree that I originally abandoned, basically the New York State or SUNY basically said, you need an American history class. And I thought I had one. And I thought, oh, it's not since 11th grade. So in one of my assignments was watch one of the episodes of the war, and in which case an anecdote from a soldier was saying that he was from Connecticut. He captured a German soldier, or they captured a bunch. It was at the end of the war, and he was saying that this guy recognized his accents because that guy was, I guess, in training to be in charge of Connecticut when the Nazis reached the US mainland to take us over. And that, as I say, that is that anyone can find that DVD and throw it in, or Blu-ray, and say, here's this story of a soldier saying, this German soldier figured he was going to be in charge of that part of the US when they reached here. So clearly they had grand designs on what they were going to do. Yes, obviously we're going to connect some of the power aspects of it, because it is Power Windows still. Had to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But if we bring home some of the lyrics with Pat, imagine a man when it all began, the pilot of Enola Gay, flying out of the shockwave on that August day. All the powers that be in the course of history would be changed forevermore.
Yeah. For the people that doesn't know, Enola Gay was the aircraft that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. So, and also something that I learned a couple of minutes ago, Enola Gay was the name of the mother of the pilot. So that's always kind of an interesting fact I didn't know. So just to reflect, of course, it's, the man dropped the bomb and it did that crash, and it changed history, because if I remember correctly on the in my history class, I think that was the major thing that ended World War II. Maybe I'm wrong. I know there was the Pearl Harbor thing, but I know that was a major thing too. So in my opinion, and the course of history will be changed forevermore. It seems like it ended. What if World War II didn't end that way, that time? It's the only thing I can reflect right now. So yeah, some other people want to add something here.
No, you're right, Pat. That was the cataclysmic event that closed the gates on World War II.
You incinerate cities, and it'll do that.
Yeah,
and you figure too, I mean, those cities were full of non-combatants, civilians. So it's pretty substantial. That's a huge statement to make. Yes, Paul Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay. Also too, I gotta wonder, with Neil's and some of the band's interest in some of their contemporary musicians of the early 80s, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, OMD, did have a song titled Enola Gay, which was one of the hits too. So I had to wonder, because I mean, Neil any reason he could have thought about this, whether it was in touring in the US in August and it was a reference to the dropping, or it could have been, he could have been listening to OMD and thought, oh, yes, I'm going to look this up. It's some of those mysteries that I would love to know. Much like I say, the neighbor of mine who worked on the Manhattan Project, how he wound up living in this city under me years ago, that's a mystery I would love to solve and never will. Because he was at Caltech, he was in Los Angeles, he was in Chicago, he was in London in a patent office. The guy had quite the history. And to me, he was an elderly gentleman who lived under me, who had an active dating life. And, a breeze could have blown him over. Very thin, little frail dude, but he was a man about town. Now, so I'm inclined to reference, which we didn't really get to last week in regards to grand designs. I'm inclined to look at the instrumentation, and that's something that is sometimes brought up in regards to these now. Certainly, this is a song that does play heavily into the keyboards. And the progression, I mean, obviously the guitar part is really prominent in the chorus. Moving into the chorus, it creates an interlude. They basically go through the form and then the singing begins. Lifeson's arpeggios, as I kind of said in my notes on our page, that it's kind of, to me, classic Lifeson, the way he would arpeggiate these chords. Which kind of outline more of a D minor, F major for the chorus, and the keyboard lines where the guitar is essentially a tacet, kind of highlight a D major, avoiding, and I'm sure intentionally avoiding the D major chord. I'm not sure if anyone else has any words on that. Ralph's got 3 guitars over his shoulder. Not that I'm trying to call you out.
Right.
But hey.
I was just like I was referencing earlier, like it's amazing that they had that verses with just drums and keyboards. That's not, for like, it's like the epitome of the synth era that everybody may or might not like, depending on your point of view. You know, no guitar, no bass, right, for a whole verse. Crazy. But it works.
Moving with the times. It was the 1980s.
Exactly.
The mid
I
80s.
think interesting little digital chirps in there too, and little digital progressions that arpeggiate in there too, you know, that makes you feel like, you know, they're telling a story with a little bit of a radar or maybe a sonar spinning in the background, you know, and it's, you know, it's important to note that you can only recreate that kind of a sentiment or feeling or that vibe with the keyboard.
Yeah.
I think that trill is a beeper that, you know, I think that's what that was. I think I read that somewhere in a tour book, right? So it's interesting. Another vestige of the 80s.
That's a cool fact. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was
Definitely
listening the live performance on Show of Hands, which I wound up listening to last week at one point, thinking about doing this song, that Lifeson threw in a few extra lead lines in the beginning, because on the studio recording, he's basically just got that C, B flat, D, which are really highlighting a D minor before just going into kind of just some chords that move blatantly away from D minor. So they're kind of working the two different tonalities at the same time, D minor, D major, but for the D major, they're really laying into the A's and the G's. Some of the G's are sus chords, so that way there's that ambiguity and not really bringing in a B or a B flat, which I always thought was interesting, because as lead, it's sort of, oh, I got a B flat as the second note I play, but these intro chords in the keyboard and the guitar, let's kind of shy away from some of that for a while. And then when the chorus really kicks in with a certain attitude and intensity, the bass and the keyboards move the root down to B flat, C down to B flat, and some of his lines are hitting into the ninth and sevenths a little bit, but he does play into the B flat. And then, yeah, that solo, very short solo, 12 measures ish, kind of unorthodox, sounds perfect. Because as I've said on other episodes, that if you really think about all of his solos, there's really not a bad solo. It's not like, well, that didn't seem to fit. It's sort of, no, that was clearly meant for that song. Whether it's one note over and over with Tom Sawyer, it was meant to be there. Or a whole lot of notes in Free Will, they're meant to be there. Hey, so
Agreed.
one of the scary, David, go for it.
Oh, I'm just going to say agreed. And that was, you know, the great thing about Alex is that, especially at this time when the thing to do was play as fast as you can and get as many notes as you can, he was more orchestral. He could play a fast solo, or he could play a few notes and catch the mood of the song. It wasn't just about a guitar driven, you know, centerpiece. You know, it was very orchestral. And like I said, he could take just a few notes that might sound easy to play, but in terms of tone and approach, phrasing, could just do things with them that, you know, made you want to go back and listen to the song again and again, which I guess I've been doing for 45 years now.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. By that time, they'd had enough of a career, and they were still young, but old enough to have nothing to prove. We've been doing this. We're 10 years into our career. We're going to write songs that are songs. You know, as Neil once said, that he felt that they became them with moving pictures, so that moving into the 80s, they could be them. Right. So, and I feel like this is a perfect example of it. You know, it's an historical song. It's very keyboard driven, where some of the original players that were fans might have said, I don't care for this, but it's a good song. And that's what it's all about, is that if you got a long catalog of songs, they don't all have to be this heavy rock riff based song or template, if I can be a little more accurate, I guess, in my statements here. But anyway,
hey, yes. I really think that the chord structure really plays into the mood of the song. We have this dark, secret, ominous, not ominous in an evil way, but, you know, quiet and secretive. And your minor chords play into that. And then they brighten once we have some type of a discovery as to what was actually going on in the desert. and what came out of it, and then you hit the climax with the Enola Gay, the pilot of Enola Gay. You have this bright sound, a bright splash on the drums. It's important to see how the song progresses as the mood of the song progresses too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then you get to the end of the song and you just have, Neil on the snare there as it's going out, and it seems to leave it open-ended.
Almost like a dirge, right? Like a funeral dirge.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's well said. Of course. But and you figure the production with Peter Collins, just the amount of layering with the keyboard lines. So just and that's something I said last week. In any of these, I'm inclined to mention that, my impression, my statement on this whole album has always been that it's very three-dimensional because of Peter Collins' production, as far as each section. I respect their original idea of, well, we want to record as a three-piece to get this solid track and then put a few things over it. But the idea of him saying, well, what if we had this and then this, and that's over there, and this is up here, and now that's over here, and now it's a wide spectrum of a song, or of a song, but an album overall. So out of curiosity, what are our favorite live tracks? Pat, you're up in the corner there. I haven't heard from you in a while. What do you like for live tracks on Manhattan Project?
Well, I think they didn't play that one really a lot live. I saw, I think, 2 tours, and then they dropped it and came back with Clockwork Angels. So that's the only one with the strings. It was magical, man. It's
Right.
like the best version has to be Clockwork Angels here. I really don't know what to add to that, really, because I didn't have a chance to see Rush a lot live. I only saw them on the R40 tour, so in that time they didn't play it. So the only version I know is Clockwork Angels, and it blows my mind every time I see that song live at that show. So yeah.
Nice.
Now, I think Manhattan Project was one they were, they had a set list A, set list B. And at the Dallas show where I was at, they didn't do it. And I was a little bummed about that, because that is one song I've always wanted to hear live. And I love the Show of Hands version of it as a live track. So I was hoping to see it live, but unfortunately, I don't think they did that at the Dallas show. But, it's on DVD, so I have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to see it on the Power Windows tour, but I'd have to agree with that the Clockwork Angels is the best live version because of the strings that they have.
Yes.
Right.
Michelle, what do you think?
Same thing. Clockwork Angels tour. You can't go wrong with the orchestration. It's really important.
Yes. Yeah, I think we're all probably in agreement there. I know the thing, I was looking at the set list from Presto, and I saw that it was on right before Xanadu. And unfortunately, I don't remember their rendition of Manhattan Project from the Presto tour, partially because when they began with Xanadu, Lifeson was using a single-necked Heinel signature guitar. And I just thought, Xanadu on a single-neck guitar? That just blew everything away. Not blew it away, but it's kind of like, all right, now I'm focusing on this. What's up? So very 1990. It seems like at this point, if I remember, from when I started the record button, I think our timer says we should probably be wrapping this up. So I would say that anyone in Rush fan viewing area, if you like the video, feel free to click like. That helps the YouTube creators. People can always share the video if they want. If they say, I really like this and I think people should check this out, leave a comment. There's a place below for that on literally every YouTube video. Well, maybe not every. I mean, some people might turn off comments, but we want to comment. And if I wanted to sound like a YouTube host, I would say smash that subscribe button, but I should probably yell it. I'm not going to yell it. I'm just going to say click the subscribe button because, I'm not going to say smash it even though I already did. So next week is Marathon. And this has been episode 137 where we discuss Manhattan Project. Thank you for tuning in.